Looking to streamline lesson planning and boost collaboration at your school? Meet ACSI Strategic Partner Edusfere, a cutting-edge curriculum mapping and management platform built to support daily teacher workflows and elevate instruction across your campus. Say goodbye to scattered plans and hello to smarter teaching with Edusfere. Learn more at edusfere.com.
Create enriching experiences beyond the classroom through ACSI Student Leadership and Learning with Emily Pigott.
Well, hello and welcome to the Student Leadership and Learning podcast, where we journey together to impact, influence, and equip today's students to lead with intentionality and purpose. Well, I am your host, Emily Pigott, and it is an honor to spend time with you as we explore ways to develop Christ-centered student leaders who will make a lasting impact in this world. Well, today's topic sets average leaders apart from great leaders. And that topic is accountability and trust. How do we build a leadership culture where students take ownership, hold each other to a high standard, and actually grow through their challenges, building a culture of trust as they go? Well, let's ask the question first. Why does accountability actually matter in leadership? Well, as Christian leaders, accountability isn't just about getting things done. It's not about checking off the to-do list. It's about integrity. It's about trust. It's about personal growth. In Proverbs 27:17, it says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Authentic leadership should be a culture creator and a culture sharpener. And it's about refining one another and refining those that we are serving. Accountability is that sharpening tool. So what does accountability actually look like in student leadership? How do we build trust within teams? How do we address failure with grace? Because it's going to happen. We're going to answer all of those questions in our time together today. So first, let's unpack what does accountability look like for Christian leaders? So for our student leadership teams, what does accountability look like? Well, first, we need to take a look at the biblical definition of accountability. Accountability is the responsibility to act with integrity, answer for one's actions, and be open to guidance and correction. It involves being held to a high standard by God, by others, and ourselves. All the while, we are striving for growth and we're striving for faithfulness. So let's unpack each of these biblical supports for accountability. First, accountability to God. What does that look like? Romans 14:2 says, so then each of us will give an account of ourselves to God. This reminds us that we are ultimately accountable to God for all of our actions, all of our choices, and everything we do within our leadership time. It looks like accountability to others. Proverbs 27:17, we've said this already, but as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. True accountability happens in relationships where people challenge and encourage each other to grow. Accountability in leadership. Luke 16:10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. Faithful leadership starts with accountability in the small things before handling bigger responsibilities. This is a key when developing student leaders. Let's make sure they can manage those small things with faith and authenticity before we put the big responsibilities in their hands. Accountability through corrections. I love this because when you walk alongside students for any length of time, correction will have to happen. The manner in which we do it will ultimately build or destruct our student leadership teams. Galatians 6:1-2 says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. This passage shows that accountability isn't about harsh punishments, but about restoring and supporting one another in love when they make mistakes. Our goal as the leaders of our students is restoration first and foremost. And accountability through confession. I love this one. James 5:16 says, therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of the righteous person is powerful and effective. Honest accountability allows for healing, for growth, and stronger faith communities. So now let's look at how to build a culture of accountability in student leadership, because it does not happen by accident. Accountability is a mark of strong Christ-centered leadership. It fosters trust, it encourages personal growth, and it ensures leaders remain faithful to their responsibilities. By embracing accountability, leaders demonstrate humility and a willingness to be shaped by God and others around them. That is a beautiful picture of a servant leader. Fostering a culture of accountability and student leadership, it requires intentionality on our part. It requires consistency on our part, and it requires an abundant amount of grace. So here's a couple of ways that we as educators and school leaders can create an environment where students take responsibility for their actions while growing in integrity and faith. Let's look first about how the story of Nathan and David. We know that story well. We know that David fell into sin. And one of the clearest examples of accountability in the Bible is when the prophet Nathan confronted King David after his sin with Bathsheba. But instead of attacking David, I love Nathan's approach. He told a parable. See, stories help us equip our students with understanding in a way that is non-accusatory and non-condemning. And the parable that Nathan told David helped David recognize his own failure. Nathan didn't have to say, this is what you did wrong. He brought David along and helped David understand it. See, Nathan's approach teaches us an important lesson. Accountability should always lead to repentance, not just correction. So when we hold student leaders accountable, we're not just pointing out mistakes. We're guiding them towards where we want them to be. We're guiding them towards growth. Accountability means taking responsibility for our actions, our commitments, and how those things affect others. It includes integrity, honesty, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. Accountability should always be redemptive, not just corrective. So let's talk about an engagement activities, maybe something that you can do with your students to begin to practice this. It could be a what would you do scenario challenge. So maybe you present students with real life dilemmas where accountability is required. For example, maybe a team member fails to complete their part of a group project that a student leadership team was working on. Have them role play. How do you handle when one team member drops the ball? What do you do? This is a great conversation piece. Or maybe in a student leadership team, you see a fellow student leader cutting corners. Maybe they're taking the easy way out. Maybe they're approaching a task in a way that isn't the best approach. What would you do? See, these are great opportunities for you to role play these scenarios with your students before they happen so that they know what to do when they happen. You know, there's a real life case study of accountability with our good friends at Chick-fil-A. So Chick-fil-A is known for its strong company values. It's known for honesty. It's known for responsibility. And their employees, as they go through their training, are taught to be accountable for mistakes. And they are taught to prioritize customer service. When the rare time happens that Chick-fil-A makes a mistake on an order, they do not make excuses. They apologize and they make it right. That's it. What a great lesson for our students to take ownership and just fix the problem. Don't point fingers. Don't make excuses. Own it, fix it, move on. What a beautiful example of accountability. Now, with accountability, trust and transparency also are components of that. They are real important when we're building our student leadership teams. It means students feel safe enough to admit mistakes. They feel safe enough to seek guidance, and they feel safe enough to grow together. Without trust, accountability feels a little bit like criticism. instead of encouragement. In other words, if I have to correct you, I really want you to trust me and trust that I have your best interests in mind. We see lots of examples of trust and accountability through how Jesus dealt with his disciples. He openly corrected them in love, as exemplified in John 13:12 through 15. He created a safe space for failure. That is my favorite thing to do with students. They're going to fail. It's okay. Let's give them a safe space to do that. Jesus knew Peter was going to deny him. But when he did, Jesus created that safe space, and he was later restored, as we hear in John 21:15 through 17. James 5:16 says, therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other. So some engagement opportunities, ways that you can practice with your students. Try a trust walk. Pair up students. One is blindfolded and the other guides them through an obstacle course just by using their voice. It's a great opportunity to see communication, succinct communication, but also that blindfolded student, they have to trust that the one that's giving them direction is not going to let them bang their shin on some large obstacle or step down and cause them to fall. Trust and communication affect accountability in leadership greatly. Or maybe create a trust and truth circle. Have students sit in a circle. Each student shares one strength they bring to the team and one area maybe where they need accountability. Then the teammates encourage each other and they share ways to help build up the culture that they're trying to create. This builds a culture of trust and support rather than fear of failure. This is where we see Galatians 6:1 through 2 come to life, where we carry one another's burdens. And in this way, you'll fulfill the law of Christ. So one school I saw, they actually implemented an accountability partner system, which is really cool. Student leaders were paired up to check in weekly on their leadership goals. So student leadership teams set goals, and then students actually held other students accountable. This created a culture where students encouraged one another, and they didn't just wait for the teachers or the adult leaders to correct them, which really that's what they want. They want to be corrected by their peers rather than by us. One of my favorite movies of all times, I don't know why it is, but it is. Well, I do know why, because it's a beautiful example of leadership, is Apollo 13. If you've listened to this podcast for a little bit of time, you've heard me say that I still to this day desire to be an astronaut, not in place of what I do, but in addition to what I do. But this movie is a beautiful example of leadership. So in 1970, the Apollo 13 spacecraft experienced a life-threatening failure. You're familiar with that. The mission only succeeded. Why? Because Gene Kranz, the flight director back at home, he was transparent. He told the men the issues that were happening. He let them know the challenges they were facing. And then he called all of his leadership team to collaborate under pressure. Yeah, I remember a time when someone was in the flight simulator and they were trying to solve the problem. And he said this, and this was back on Earth. He said, don't give me anything they don't have up there. Put me in the exact environment that they are in up there so that I can solve this problem and give them guidance and direction. He didn't want anything that they weren't experienced up there. Honesty and teamwork are vital for problem solving and accountability. Well, another way to foster accountability and trust with your student leaders is to address failure with grace while providing opportunities for growth. We love to come back to the story of Peter's denial and restoration. See, Peter was one of Jesus' closest disciples, and he failed in a significant way. It's easy for us to judge Peter, but I would definitely not, because he denied Jesus 3 times. But we may think I would never, but I don't know if we were in that same scenario. But when Jesus restored him, he didn't humiliate or shame Peter. That's what I love. Instead, he gave him a new purpose. What did he say to him? He said, feed my sheep. Jesus turned Peter's failures into a foundation for future leadership. He was entrusted with a greater mission after he failed. So, some key lessons for student leadership. Failure isn't the end of a leader, it's a turning point. Failure should never be seen as a learning opportunity. Failure should be seen as a learning opportunity, not a punishment. Accountability should always provide a path for growth and restoration, not just consequences. So, some potential engagement activities. Maybe have students keep a failure reflection journal. We all fail. So maybe what we do is we ask our students to write about a personal failure and what they learned from it. Maybe have a discussion on then how that failure can be turned into growth and leadership development. Now, I'm not saying for students to air everything that they failed and just be ultimately transparent and lay it all out there. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when something doesn't go the way it should have because maybe you weren't leading as you should. Let's reflect on that and let's use it as an opportunity to grow. Another engagement possibility could be a what did we learn exercise. I loved doing this with my student leadership teams. If we created a big project and we were implementing something, I always wanted to debrief. And still to this day, the teams that I lead, we will always debrief and ask these questions. What went well? What could have been better? And what will I do differently next time? Because we want to shift the focus from blame to growth. Anyway, real life case study. We've heard that, Michael Jordan was cut from his basketball team. But I was reading an article recently because it was an article on failure. And of course, they're going to use this example. But I've never seen this quote before from Michael Jordan. He said, "I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that's why I succeeded." Never heard him say that before. Great leaders don't fear failure. They learn from it. So another way to foster accountability and trust with your student leaders is to establish mentor and accountability partnerships. So accountability thrives when leaders support one another. So group work helps students understand that shared responsibility and how accountability strengthens teams. Now, I'm not talking about group work in the classroom. I have strong opinions on that. That's for another day. I'm talking about when you're working together on a project that you are leading. That's when I say group work, that's what I mean. When students work together, they quickly learn that their actions or their inactions, dropping the ball, it impacts others and it ultimately impacts the outcome of what the team is working on. It teaches that students, you've got to rely on one another. And there's a great example of this in the early church, Acts 2:42-47. It says, the first believers were accountable to each other, sharing everything, and they met regularly to encourage and correct one another. This wasn't about getting things done for the early church. It was about fostering strong, supportive communities within the church. Nehemiah's leadership is a beautiful example of this. Nehemiah 4:6, and then in 21, he didn't just order the people to rebuild Jerusalem's walls. He worked alongside them. His example, his tenacity, his ability for those to trust that he would do what he said he would do, that set the tone for collective responsibility. And of course, watching how Paul mentored Timothy, guiding him in faith and leadership in 1 Timothy 4:12-16. All of these show us that mentorship builds accountability because someone is invested in your growth. So how do we do this? An engagement activity could be peer accountability partnerships. Pair students up to check in weekly on leadership goals. We've talked a little bit about that already, but now we're taking it a step further. Now we're checking in, we're praying for one another, and we're offering constructive feedback. Or perhaps establish accountability contracts for group work. Each student in a group writes down their responsibilities. This is key for clarity. Clarity is a whole nother leadership component that is so important. We won't dive into that today, but this is a great opportunity to add clarity for your students. And then the students must reflect and adjust if they don't meet expectations instead of blaming someone else. I recently read about Toyota's system that they have in place. I've never heard of it before. Maybe you have. It's an andon cord system. So Toyota empowers its employees to pause production if they see a problem. It reinforces collective accountability. So the Anton cord is a tool used in their production system to signify quality issues. And it actually is a cord that someone could pull. Now, this was in the early days. There was a cord. And if an employee pulled that cord, it would stop the assembly line. So if one person found an issue, they would stop the assembly line and the whole team would work to fix it together. And so a team would then respond. And then if the issue can't be resolved, the line completely stops until it does. So what are the benefits of establishing something like this, an opportunity for our students to pull the cord, for lack of better words? Well, it empowers workers. It empowers our students. It empowered the Toyota workers to take part in quality assurance. They knew that they could solve the problem. So therefore, they were very proactive in looking for it. It encourages culture and pride. In Toyota, they wanted their employees to have pride in their work. Don't we want that for our students? It increased the rate of improvement for Toyota. It maximized the use of local knowledge. Who better to recognize a problem than the people who were putting the Toyota car together? And then it achieves continuous improvement. So what if we empowered our students to stop the presses when they see a problem? This empowers them to look proactively while also knowing they can be a part of the solution. So the final way that we're going to talk about today to foster accountability and trust within our student leaders is to model accountability as educators and leaders. You knew I would go there. Students must learn accountability by watching us, their mentors. Everything we talked about must start with us, or the whole thing falls apart. In schools that have strong leadership accountability, student achievement is higher. When principals and teachers own their actions, students follow suit. My students knew if I made a decision and it resulted in something that didn't go well, I would be the first one to step up to the plate and say, that's mine. That's on me. Let's fix it together. I need your help to fix it, and let's move on. They will watch and they will learn from us, the good and, of course, the bad. So how do you know when a culture of accountability exists within your school? You see students that are owning their own mistakes and they're learning from them. You are surrounded by leaders, both your faculty and staff and your student leaders, who don't blame others. They take responsibility. And you see honesty, trust, and transparency are prioritized above all. And of course, feedback is welcomed. It is never feared. You see, accountability, it takes courage. It's not always easy to admit mistakes. It's not easy to receive feedback. It's not easy to hold people to a high standard. But with God's help, we can build student leaders who lead with integrity, authenticity, and responsibility. You see, leadership and accountability, they are a gift. And I pray that God will give us the wisdom to lead with integrity, the courage to hold one another accountable in love, and the grace to grow through challenges. May we help our students to embrace accountability, not as a burden, but as a pathway to growth. And may we all lead with humility, transparency, and a heart that honors Him. Well, thank you for joining me today on the Student Leadership and Learning Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, and I hope you did, share it with a fellow educator, and don't forget to subscribe for more practical tips and biblical insights on leadership. Until next time, let's keep leading with a servant mindset and authenticity, and let's inspire others to do the same. Why? Because what you do matters. Every moment, every day. You are a difference maker, and our students are worth it. We'll see you next time.
Student Leadership and Learning is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Create enriching experiences beyond the classroom by visiting acsi.org/studentleadership.